The safe's door gaped open like a dare. She froze in the silence. Her reflection in the steel glaring back. Was this trust or a trap? The morning sun spilled over the sprawling glass walls of Ward Estate, but its warmth never seemed to touch Ethan Ward. He sat at the head of a 12-foot mahogany table, a single plate in front of him, untouched scrambled eggs, cooling toast, and coffee black enough to match the mood that clung to him like a second skin. His phone buzzed once, then again. Emails, stock updates, reminders from his assistant. He ignored them all. His gaze instead drifted to the far corner of the room, to the heavy vault door embedded in the wall. Polished steel, always locked, a silent witness to his life. Inside, millions sat in neatly banded stacks, symbols of success, symbols of protection, symbols of the fact that over the years you could never really trust anyone. Ethan had learned that the hard way, first from a business partner who siphoned funds from their company, then from a fiancé who had taken her ring and half his trust fund to start a new life somewhere sunny. People always had a price. Always. In another part of the city, Amara Johnson slipped into her crisp black uniform and knotted her hair into a bun so tight it pulled at her scalp. She left her tiny apartment with its flickering hallway light, locking the door behind her. The morning air smelled faintly of diesel and fried dough from the corner bakery. Amara worked 3 jobs, 2 part-time and 1 full-time, the latter being at Ward Estate. It paid better than most, but it came with the constant hum of being watched, weighed and judged, not by cameras necessarily, but by the eyes of wealth, which could be more cutting than any lens. She'd been at it for nearly 2 years, long enough to know Ethan's routines, his habits, even the way he set down his coffee cup with a controlled precision. He wasn't cruel, but there was a wall around him, a cold, impenetrable thing, and she'd learned to keep her own wall just as high. By the time she arrived at the estate, the sun was higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The driveway was lined with imported maple trees whose leaves barely dared to fall out of place. She stepped inside through the service entrance, the faint scent of lemon polish and expensive cologne hitting her immediately. Marta, the cook, gave her a tired smile from the kitchen. "Morning, Amara." "He's in the dining room," Marta whispered, as though speaking too loudly might crack the fragile air of the house. Amara nodded, slipping past with the silent efficiency of someone used to being invisible. In the dining room, Ethan glanced up briefly as she entered, then back down at his phone. She set about her work, dusting shelves, straightening picture frames, running a cloth over the gleaming surface of the sideboard. If Ethan noticed the faint slump in her shoulders, he didn't show it. If Amara noticed the untouched breakfast, she didn't ask. They lived in a dance of polite detachment. She never lingered, he never pried. But today, as Ethan sipped his coffee, a thought formed in his mind, sharp, deliberate, and a little cruel. What if... He'd done it before with contractors, assistants, even his own cousin once, leaving something valuable within reach to see what they'd do. A private test, a small thrill in a life otherwise sterile. He set his cup down, the faint click echoing in the stillness. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth but unreadable, "make sure the study gets extra attention today. I'll be out for a few hours." Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "Yes, sir." By noon, Ethan was gone, the low growl of his Aston Martin fading down the driveway. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. In the study, Amara opened the double doors, inhaling the faint scent of leather and cedar from the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She began dusting, starting with the top shelves, working her way down. And then she saw it, the safe. It was open, not wide, but just enough for the light to catch on what was inside. Bundles of cash, crisp and perfect, and a gleam of diamonds in a black velvet pouch. For a moment, she froze. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second dragging like a heavy chain. She stepped closer. Not because she wanted the money, God knew she didn't, but because her stomach tightened with something sharper than temptation. This was no accident. Someone like Ethan didn't forget to lock a safe. The insult settled over her like dust, fine, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Her reflection stared back at her in the steel door, eyes darker than usual, mouth pressed into a line. She took a deep breath, reached out, and with a firm but measured motion, pushed the door shut until it clicked. Then she turned away, her heart still tight in her chest. If someone you worked for tested your integrity without telling you, would you confront them, walk away, or prove them wrong in silence? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk trust. Ethan Ward sat in his car, engine idling in the private parking garage beneath his downtown office building, phone balanced in his palm. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't reading market reports. Instead, he was streaming live footage from the estate's internal security system, a habit he'd never admit aloud. The grainy camera in the study captured Amara dusting the shelves, methodical as always. Then she reached the desk. The safe sat partially open, an invitation dressed as carelessness. Ethan leaned forward, thumb hovering over the pause button, as if that might still the moment. She stopped, looked. For a heartbeat, he swore she was going to reach inside. The tiniest movement of her hand toward the gap sent a jolt through him. Not excitement exactly, but something sharper, hungrier. Instead, she simply shut it, firmly, deliberately. No hesitation. Ethan sat back, exhaling slowly. But it wasn't pride or relief flooding his chest. It was confusion. Her posture, straight-backed but heavy. Her face, impassive but shadowed. He'd seen enough people walk away from money to know the difference between indifference and insult. Amara wasn't unaffected. She was offended. Back at the estate, Amara carried on with her duties, each motion clipped, precise, like she was keeping herself from shattering something. She didn't linger in the study a second longer than necessary. When Ethan returned late that afternoon, she was in the kitchen with Marta, wiping down the counters. "Afternoon," he said casually, stepping inside. "Good evening, sir," Amara replied without looking at him, her voice polite but hollow. He paused. Normally, she'd at least meet his eyes when speaking. "Everything in order today?" "Yes, sir." That was it. No small updates about the pantry, no quiet note about the roses blooming in the garden, things she usually mentioned in passing. Ethan almost asked if she'd noticed anything unusual, but the words died before reaching his tongue. That night, in his study, he poured himself a whiskey and replayed the footage again. Her hesitation, the way she shut the safe, that faint tightening in her jaw. It should have satisfied him. The test was passed, but instead, it gnawed at him, burrowing under his skin. Why had it mattered to him how she felt? The next morning, their dance of detachment continued. She moved through the halls like a ghost in black, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Ethan found himself watching her longer than usual, waiting for a crack in the mask she wore. At one point, as she polished the silver tray in the living room, he caught her reflection in the glass window. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then dropped again. No hostility, no warmth, just distance. It irritated him more than he expected. Later that day, he intercepted her in the hallway outside the study. "Amara," he said, his tone casual but probing. "How long have you been working here now?" "Almost 2 years, sir. And in all that time, I've never had a reason to doubt you." Her eyes met his then, and for the first time since the test, he saw the quiet storm behind them. "Good to know," she said flatly, before stepping past him. The words were polite. The delivery was not. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the echo of her voice clinging to him like smoke. That evening, Marta found Amara in the pantry, staring at the rows of neatly labeled jars. "You okay?" Marta asked softly. Amara forced a smile. "Just tired." But inside she was anything but tired. She was disappointed that even after nearly 2 years of honest work, she was still just another suspect in her employer's eyes. She hadn't touched the money. Not because she feared getting caught, but because she'd promised herself long ago she wouldn't let desperation dictate her morals. And yet, the sting of being tested without cause lingered. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in the study, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass. His gaze flicked to the safe. What had he been hoping for? To catch her stealing, to prove himself right about people. Instead, all he'd done was build another wall between them. But why did that matter so much now? He set the glass down and rubbed his temples. This wasn't over. Do you think Ethan should admit to Amara that he left the safe open on purpose? Or would that make things worse? Comment below. Your take might just be the next plot twist. The next 3 days passed like a chess match no one wanted to admit they were playing. Moves and counter-moves. Avoidance as strategy. Ethan noticed Amara was more efficient than ever, her work spotless, her timing precise, her presence nearly invisible. If she was in the same room as him, she was on the far side of it. If he entered a room, she'd find a reason to leave within minutes. It was infuriating. Not because she was failing at her job, if anything she was performing flawlessly, but because she was treating him like a stranger. On the 4th morning, he lingered in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. "You've been quiet lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "Just keeping busy," she replied, without looking up. Her tone was smooth, but it had an edge, like a blade sheathed in velvet. "Everything all right?" he pressed. "Yes, sir." The sir landed heavier than usual, like she was building a wall out of formality. Ethan almost blurted it out. "I tested you. You passed." "I was wrong." But the words stayed trapped behind pride and the habit of control. That evening, he sat in the study with the safe closed, locked and humming quietly in its place. He told himself he'd imagined the shift in her behavior, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had caused it. His phone buzzed. A text from his friend Julian. "Drinks tonight? You look like you need to get out of your own head." Ethan almost declined, but something in him wanted distance from the estate, from the heavy air Amara left in her wake. At the bar, Julian laughed too loudly and flirted with the waitress, but Ethan barely heard him. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of Amara closing the safe, her jaw tight, her eyes shadowed. Julian finally asked, "What's eating you? You look like you lost a bet." Ethan smirked faintly. "Something like that." The next morning, Marta found Amara polishing the silver again, even though it gleamed. "You're going to rub a hole in that tray," Marta teased gently. Amara shrugged. "Better than sitting still." Marta gave her a knowing look. "You're upset with him." Amara paused, cloth in hand. "I'm not upset, just reminded." "Of what?" "That some people will never see you for who you are, only for what they're afraid you might be." Marta didn't push further, but her eyes softened with quiet sympathy. Later that day, Ethan caught Amara in the library, dusting the top shelves. "I've been thinking," he said. She didn't turn around. "About what, sir?" He hesitated. "About trust." Finally she faced him, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Trust is a two-way street." He nodded slowly, but before he could reply, her phone rang, a soft chime that seemed almost out of place in the quiet room. She glanced at the screen, then excused herself without another word. Ethan stood there, staring at the space she'd just occupied, feeling the conversation slip away like water through his fingers. That night, lying in bed, he told himself he'd drop it. He had more important things to focus on: investments, property acquisitions, a meeting with the mayor next week. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her hand pressing the safe shut, not taking, not tempted, just refusing. And somehow, that refusal felt like a judgment against him personally. When someone pulls away after being hurt, do you believe it's better to give them space or push for a conversation? Share your thoughts below. This is where the story could turn either way. The storm rolled in without warning, thick clouds swallowing the late afternoon light, wind howling like it had a score to settle. By the time Amara finished vacuuming the hallway rugs, the first thunderclap rattled the estate's high windows. Marta poked her head into the hall. "Road advisories are out. Power lines are down in the next county over. I'll head out now before it gets worse," Amara said, untying her apron. Marta frowned. "Driveway's already blocked. A maple came down across the lower bend. Grounds crew won't be able to clear it until morning." Before Amara could reply, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister. "You're staying here tonight." His tone was more command than suggestion. Amara's spine stiffened. "I can walk down to the main road." "In this?" He gestured toward the window where rain lashed sideways against the glass. "You'd be soaked and probably flattened by a tree branch before you made it 100 yards. Her lips pressed together, the protest dying in her throat. She hated feeling cornered, especially by him. Marta busied herself making dinner, leaving the two of them in a silence that felt both fragile and unyielding. The dining table was set for 3, but when Marta excused herself early, muttering something about checking the generator, Ethan and Amara were left alone. He cleared his throat. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." She sat, but her posture remained perfectly straight, like she was bracing for impact. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware loud against the rain's constant drumbeat. Halfway through, Ethan spoke. "You ever get tired of the quiet here?" Her eyes lifted from her plate. "I'm used to quiet." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's heavy." "Yeah," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Heavy's a good word for it." After dinner, the storm knocked the power out completely. Darkness swallowed the estate, broken only by the flicker of the fireplace Ethan lit in the study. Amara lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should retreat to the guest room or join him. He looked up from the fire. "You're welcome to sit. Safer than pacing dark hallways." She stepped inside slowly, perching on the far end of the leather sofa. The fire's crackle filled the space between them. Outside, branches scraped the windows, wind howling through unseen cracks. "You grew up here?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "No. Bought it when the company went public. It felt like proof." "Proof of what?" "That I'd made it. That I was untouchable." He smirked faintly, gaze fixed on the flames. "Turns out being untouchable just means no one gets close." Amara studied him for a moment, then looked away. "Some people like it that way. Do you?" Her laugh was quiet, but humorless. "Doesn't matter what I like. You learn to live with what you're given." The fire popped, sending a small ember floating upward before it faded. Neither spoke for a while, but something in the air shifted, still heavy, but no longer impenetrable. When a particularly loud gust rattled the window pane, she glanced toward it, then back to him. "If this house blows away, I'm blaming you." The corner of his mouth lifted, just a fraction. Fair enough. It was the smallest crack in the wall between them, but it was there. "Have you ever been stuck with someone you were avoiding? And did it make things better or worse? Drop your story in the comments. I'm curious how that tension plays out in real life. The storm refused to let up. By morning, the estate grounds glistened with puddles, and branches littered the driveway like fallen matchsticks. The hum of the backup generator was the only sign of life besides the rain. Marta had driven her small SUV as far as the road allowed to meet her husband, leaving Ethan and Amara alone. After breakfast, Amara gathered the cleaning supplies, determined to busy herself. But when she passed the study, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Amara, come here a second." She stepped inside, wary. He was at the desk, a leather-bound photo album open in front of him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "I still have rooms to—" "They'll wait." She hesitated, then sat. He turned the album toward her. Old photographs, grainy, sun-faded images of a boy in hand-me-down clothes standing in front of a rusted trailer. "That's me," Ethan said quietly. She blinked, glancing between him and the boy in the picture. "You grew up?" "In the middle of nowhere, with a father who drank more than he worked and a mother who disappeared before I could walk. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to take it, and if I wanted to keep it, I'd have to protect it from everyone, because sooner or later, they'd try to take it back." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes stayed fixed on the photographs as if looking at her might make the admission too raw. Amara leaned back slightly. "That's why you don't trust anyone." "That's why I test people," he corrected, though the word sounded hollow even to him. She let a long moment pass before speaking. "You know what I learned early?" He met her gaze, waiting. "That your word is the only thing you can't afford to lose. Money comes and goes. Jobs too. But if people stop believing your word, you've got nothing." It wasn't said with heat or anger, just a quiet conviction that landed heavier than any accusation. Ethan didn't reply immediately. He studied her, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the version he'd been keeping in his head. "Is that why you shut the safe?" he asked finally. Her brows rose. "I shut the safe because it wasn't mine to open, not because I thought you'd thank me for it." The air between them tightened, but it wasn't quite hostility. It was truth. They spent the rest of the morning in the study, him leafing through the album, her dusting the shelves in a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. Around noon, when the rain eased to a drizzle, they moved to the kitchen. Ethan boiled water for tea, a rare gesture from a man who usually had everything prepared for him. He set the steaming mug in front of her. "For the record, you've given me more reason to trust you than anyone in years." She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Then, maybe stop looking for reasons not to." It wasn't a truce, not yet, but it was the first bridge built between two very stubborn shores. If someone from your past shaped the way you trust, or don't trust, people now, what happened? Share if you're comfortable. Stories like that are often more relatable than we think. By late afternoon, the storm had softened to a gentle rain, and the estate felt oddly peaceful. The constant hum of the generator had faded into the background, replaced by the steady drip of water from the gutters outside. Amara was in the kitchen, carefully slicing bread for sandwiches, when Ethan walked in carrying a dusty box. "What's that?" she asked. "Board games," he said, with an almost sheepish shrug. "Figured we could try not sitting in separate rooms pretending we don't exist." Her brows arched. "You play board games?" "I used to," he said, setting the box on the counter. "Mostly when the power went out, back when the only entertainment we had was candles and a deck of cards." There was something almost boyish in the way he said it. They ended up in the study with a game of Scrabble spread out between them, the fire once again crackling in the hearth. At first the conversation was sparse, the occasional word about the tiles on the board, but slowly something shifted. When Ethan placed the word wealthy across a triple word score, Amara smirked. "Shocking choice." "You could challenge it," he teased. "I'm more interested in making lonely intersect it," she replied, laying her tiles down with a quiet satisfaction. He chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not polite, not measured, just real. As the game went on, they drifted into stories. Ethan told her about the time he and Julian, as teenagers, had tried to borrow a neighbor's canoe and ended up sinking it in the middle of a lake. Amara laughed so hard she had to set her tiles down. "I can't imagine you in a canoe. You probably wore cufflinks." "I was 14, he said, grinning. "I didn't own cufflinks. Yet." In turn, she told him about her younger sister Maya, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, how Maya had been the reason she never let her pride slip, no matter how bad things got. "That's incredible," he said softly. "You did all that for her?" "She's family," Amara replied simply, as though that was all the explanation needed. The rain picked up again after sunset, but inside the air was warmer, not from the fire, but from the ease that had settled between them. At one point, when the power flickered and the lights dimmed, Ethan rose to light more candles. The glow caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them in ways Amara hadn't seen before. "You ever think," he said, as he set a candle on the table, "that maybe the people we trust the least are the ones we should give the most chance to prove us wrong?" Her gaze held his for a long moment. "And you ever think that if you stopped testing people, you might find out they were worth trusting all along?" Neither looked away first. By the time they packed up the game, the room smelled faintly of melting wax and wood smoke. It was the first time in 2 years Amara had lingered in the study after finishing her work, and the first time Ethan had wanted her to. And for both of them, that realization felt like the beginning of something they weren't ready to name. "Do you think lighter moments are the key to rebuilding trust? Or do serious conversations do more? Share your thoughts. This debate is as old as relationships themselves. The next morning brought clear skies, sunlight streaming through the estate's high windows like a quiet promise that the storm had passed. Ethan found himself in the kitchen earlier than usual, brewing coffee. Amara walked in, hair slightly looser than normal, her expression calm. They exchanged a small, unspoken smile, an acknowledgement of the strange, unplanned companionship the storm had forced on them. It might have been a good day. It should have been. Until the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door to find Clara standing there, his ex-fiancée, perfectly styled, lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said, stepping inside without invitation, "you still live in this museum of yours." "What do you want, Clara?" Ethan asked, his voice cool. "I was in town. Thought I'd drop by, catch up." Her gaze drifted toward the kitchen, where Amara had just set down a tray of clean glasses. Clara's smile sharpened. "And who's this?" Before Ethan could answer, Clara continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've diversified your staff. Very progressive of you." Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan's stomach knotted. He should have spoken up immediately, shut Clara down, made it clear her words were unacceptable. But the old reflex to keep situations controlled, to avoid direct conflict, froze him for just a second too long. And in that second, Clara's smirk deepened. "I suppose someone has to dust all this wealth you hoard." Amara didn't flinch, didn't respond. She simply placed the last glass in the cupboard, nodded politely to Ethan, and walked past both of them toward the service entrance. "Amara," Ethan started, but she didn't stop. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her landed like a gunshot. Clara laughed softly. "Oh, did I interrupt something?" Ethan turned on her, voice low but sharp. "Get out." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Get out." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she shrugged and sauntered toward the door. "Suit yourself. Still touchy, I see." The moment she was gone, Ethan's chest felt too tight. He replayed the scene in his mind, every second of his hesitation magnified until it was unbearable. He found Amara in the staff parking area, unlocking her car. "Amara, wait," he said, approaching quickly. She didn't look at him. "I'm not upset about her, Ethan. I'm upset about you." The words landed like a slap. "You didn't say anything," she continued, her voice steady but charged. "You let her talk to me like that, and you said nothing. 2 days ago you were telling me I'd given you reason to trust me, and today you let someone treat me like I'm less than a person." His mouth opened, but no defense came out. She shook her head. "I've dealt with that my whole life. I don't need it where I work, and I definitely don't need it from someone who claims to see me differently." With that, she got in her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the sunlight that suddenly felt as cold as marble. Back in the study, Ethan sat in silence. The safe loomed in the corner, closed and locked, but now it seemed to mock him. He had tested her once, and she had passed. Now, when he had been tested, he had failed. And he wasn't sure she'd give him another chance. If someone stayed silent when they should have defended you, could you forgive them? Or would that silence speak louder than any apology? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. The estate felt emptier than usual, not just quiet, hollow. Ethan sat in the study that evening, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the desk. Clara's words had faded, but Amara's, those stayed. "I'm upset about you." It wasn't anger in her voice that haunted him. It was disappointment, the kind that said he had confirmed her worst expectations. He'd spent years convincing himself that his guardedness protected him. But now he could see the truth. It had made him a coward. For the first time in a long time, he didn't try to think his way through the problem. He just felt it. The shame, the regret, the fear that this might be beyond repair. He thought of the way she had shut the safe, the way she had sat across from him in the candlelight, teasing him over a board game, the way she had told him to stop looking for reasons not to trust her, and then the way she had walked away without looking back. By morning, the decision was made. Ethan drove to the city, his car cutting through the light fog that clung to the streets. He parked outside a modest brick apartment building, the kind where tenants hung plants in the windows and kids rode scooters on the sidewalk. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the third floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. It opened a crack. Amara's eyes appeared first, cautious. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk." "I'm not interested in excuses." "Good," he said quickly, "because I don't have one. I only have the truth, and it's this." I froze. I let my pride and my old habits get in the way. I should have defended you. I should have shut her down before she finished her sentence. She studied him for a long moment. "Why didn't you?" "Because for years I've been afraid of conflict, afraid that letting my guard down would make me lose something. But I realized yesterday that I lost something anyway. I lost you." She opened the door a little wider but didn't invite him in. "You don't know me well enough to lose me," she said softly. "I know enough," he replied. "Enough to know I trust you more than anyone. Enough to know I care about you, not as an employee, not as someone who passed my stupid test, but as someone I want in my life." Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again. "Words are easy, Ethan." He nodded. "Then let me prove it." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. She didn't take it right away, but her eyes flicked to it. "It's not jewelry," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver key. "What is that?" "The spare key to my safe," he said quietly. "Because the truth is, you've had it all along. This just makes it official." Silence stretched between them. The hum of the city filtered in from the street below. Car horns, distant voices, the rattle of the L train. Finally, Amara reached out and took the box. "This doesn't fix everything," she said. "I know," he replied, "but maybe it can be a start." For the first time since the storm, her expression softened. "Give me time," she said, "as much as you need." When she closed the door, Ethan didn't feel the sting of rejection. He felt the weight of a choice made, and the quiet hope that it might be the right one. If someone admits their failure and makes a real effort to change, do you think trust can fully return, or is it never the same? Share your view. This is one of the toughest calls in any relationship. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of polite but brief conversations at work, 2 weeks of Ethan giving her space. No grand gestures, no forced apologies, just quiet consistency. Amara noticed the difference. He no longer hovered near the study door when she came to clean it. He no longer locked the safe when she was in the room, even if he stepped away. He even started brewing extra coffee in the mornings, leaving a steaming mug on the counter with her name written on a sticky note. She never said thank you aloud, but she drank it every time. One Friday evening, after the last of the staff had left, Amara was gathering her things when Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the garden, where the last traces of sunset bled into the horizon. The air was cool, scented faintly with roses and damp earth. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it to find a letter, formal at first, but quickly giving way to something more personal. "I am sorry I made you feel small. I am sorry I hesitated when you needed me to stand tall. You have shown me more integrity than most people I've known in my life, and I would be a fool to risk losing that again." Amara read it twice, her fingers tracing the words. "You wrote this?" "I needed you to have it in writing," he said with a small smile. "In case I ever forget, you can remind me." They stood there in silence for a moment, the garden lights flickering on one by one. "I'm not used to people admitting they're wrong," she said finally. "I'm not used to admitting it," he replied, "but for you, I'm willing to get used to it." A laugh escaped her, soft but genuine. "You're still a little full of yourself." "And you're still not afraid to tell me," he said. She handed the letter back, but he shook his head. "It's yours, keep it." Her gaze held his for a long moment, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not a dramatic revelation, but the quiet certainty that the walls between them were no longer unscalable. "I trust you," she said. The words simple but weighted, and for Ethan, it felt like the most valuable thing he had ever been given. They walked back toward the house together, their steps unhurried. At the back door, he paused. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Not here. Somewhere with good food and bad lighting." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "We'll see." But when she walked away, there was no coldness in it, just the promise that she might say yes. Inside, the study waited, safe closed but unlocked. The key he had given her was nowhere in sight, yet he knew she still had it. That was enough. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. Do you believe love and trust can grow stronger after being tested, or is the first crack always there? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know your perspective. He searched every room. The nursery, empty. The kitchen, empty. The entire mansion, silent. No sign of his maid, no sign of his baby. His heart started to race. Kevin Grant had built empires, moved markets, and controlled everything in his world, except this moment. Then he stepped outside, and what he saw stopped him cold. There, on a stone bench, in the biting morning air, was Gloria, asleep, still in uniform, arms wrapped tightly around baby Emily. A faded blue blanket covered the child, and Gloria's yellow cleaning gloves were still clinging to her hands. Neither of them stirred. For a second, he couldn't breathe. Then, he saw Emily's tiny chest rise, her fingers curled into Gloria's apron, and on Gloria's face, a quiet kind of peace. He didn't understand it. Not yet. But what looked like recklessness was something else entirely. And that moment changed everything. The sky hadn't turned yet. It was still dark in Manhattan. Street lamps flickered against stone buildings, and the wind carried that early-hour stillness, the kind that makes you feel every second of silence. Kevin Grant stood on the marble steps of his estate, barefoot, tense. The cold bit at his skin. But it wasn't the cold that made him shiver. It was the emptiness. He had already checked the nursery. No baby. He'd called the nanny. No answer. Walked every hallway. But the one person who always kept things running, Gloria, his quiet, invisible maid, was nowhere to be found. Then, a flicker of movement near the garden. He stepped off the porch, heart pounding, breath shallow. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not in his house, not in his world. And then, he saw her. Gloria, curled up on the garden bench, back leaned against the cold stone, eyes closed, breathing steady. In her arms, Emily. The baby was wrapped in an old blanket, tucked so closely into Gloria's chest it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. Kevin froze. The yellow gloves were still on Gloria's hands, her head tilted back, her arm locked around the child like instinct, like protection. He took a step closer. No words, no reaction. Emily's fingers clung to Gloria's uniform. Her tiny face nestled into the space just below Gloria's chin. Safe. Too safe for this to be an accident. Kevin didn't know why, he didn't know how. But he knew one thing, this wasn't neglect, it was love. Not the kind you buy, the kind you carry, even when it breaks you. And in that still, cold moment, everything Kevin believed about love, family, and what it means to protect something began to crack. But before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this story makes you believe that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding our world together. The air hung thick with silence, not peace, not calm, just that heavy kind of stillness you feel when something's not right. Kevin stood frozen beside the garden path, his breath caught halfway between fear and disbelief. Gloria didn't stir. Neither did the baby. He stepped closer. Slowly. The gravel crunched beneath his bare feet. The closer he got, the stranger it all felt. The bench was damp with morning frost. The blanket barely covered Emily's legs. And Gloria. She looked like she hadn't meant to sleep, just hadn't had the strength to stay awake. Her arms were still wrapped around the baby, one yellow-gloved hand tucked under Emily's back, the other across her tiny chest, as if shielding her from the wind. Kevin's mind raced. Why was his daughter out here? Why didn't anyone wake him? Where was the stuff? Why didn't she knock on his door? But none of those questions made it past his lips, because in that moment, all he could see was the way Emily's small body rose and fell gently against Gloria's. Safe. He crouched beside them, carefully. His hand hovered near the child's back, unsure whether to lift her or let her stay. Gloria's eyes fluttered. She blinked, dazed, then saw him. She jolted upright, panic flashing across her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, breathless. He held up a hand, not in anger, just confusion. "Why?" That was all he could manage. Gloria looked down at Emily, then back at him. Her voice cracked. "She was cold, sir. The heat, it stopped working. She cried for hours. I didn't know what else to do." She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain beyond that. She just said it. And Kevin, who had always believed every problem had a solution, every mistake a price, felt something inside him shift. Gloria wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't even trying to be forgiven. She was just tired. Tired in a way no amount of sleep could fix. He looked at her one last time, really looked, at the circles under her eyes, at the trembling in her arms, at the way she hadn't let go of Emily, even in sleep. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel rich, not at all. Kevin stood there, unmoving. The wind had picked up, brushing past the marble columns behind him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the yellow glove still resting against his daughter's back, and on the quiet woman who had been invisible in his home until this very moment. Gloria didn't look up again. She just sat there silent, arms still wrapped around Emily, like a mother clinging to something she couldn't afford to lose twice. Kevin swallowed hard. He didn't know what emotion was hitting him. Guilt, shock, or something far less familiar. All he knew was that he didn't want to raise his voice. Not here. Not now. He stepped back. Gently. His hand brushed across the top of the blanket, just enough to feel the warmth still trapped inside it. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to keep his child safe. And the gloves, still on Gloria's hands, bright yellow, a little torn at the fingertips, smudged with polish and dust. She hadn't even taken them off. Kevin's mind went back to the night before, the text from the staff group chat he hadn't answered, the subtle drop in the thermostat reading he'd dismissed. He remembered walking past the nursery door on his way out, hearing Emily cry and thinking she'd settle soon. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't checked. Now he was here, outside, barefoot, standing beside a bench in the freezing dark, watching the woman he paid to clean his house cradle the only thing in his life that ever truly mattered. Gloria finally spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't want her to cry anymore. She kept her eyes on the child. Not once did she ask for understanding. Not once did she explain herself with pride. She just sat there still, as if ready for whatever judgment would come next. Kevin took a breath, the kind that shakes a little on the way out. I didn't know the heat broke. Gloria nodded slowly. I called maintenance. No one came. A pause. You were at the gala. He didn't remember much about the fundraiser, only that the champagne had been warm and the conversations colder. I was going to rock her, Gloria said, just until she settled. Just for a few minutes. Her voice broke. I didn't mean to fall asleep. Kevin looked down at the child in her arms, now stirring softly, eyelids fluttering. He didn't have words for what he felt, only questions. And most of them weren't for her. They were for himself. He didn't ask her to stand, didn't tell her to explain. He just said quietly, "Come inside." She hesitated. Her arms tightened around the baby, as if part of her believed this was the last time she'd be allowed to hold her. But Kevin didn't reach. He didn't rush. He simply turned and led the way, leaving the front door wide open behind him. She followed. The marble floors felt colder than the bench. The silence inside the house, deeper than it had been outside. Kevin gestured to a seat in the kitchen, not the servants' table tucked behind the pantry, the main one. He didn't sit at first. He just watched as Gloria gently lowered Emily into the bassinet beside the counter, brushing the blanket into place like it was made of gold. Then she sat, still wearing the gloves. She kept her hands folded in her lap. Didn't speak. Didn't blink. Kevin pulled out the chair across from her and finally asked, "Who taught you how to hold a child like that?" A long pause, then she answered, "My daughter." His body stilled. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at a small crack in the tile. Her voice was even, but quiet. Too quiet. "Her name was Ava," she said. "She was 2. Kevin didn't move, not even to breathe. "She got sick one winter," Gloria continued. "We didn't have heat, couldn't afford to keep it running all night. I bundled her up best I could." She pressed her hands together until her knuckles went white. "She had a fever. I tried to bring it down. Wet towels, cold rags. I stayed up holding her, just like I held Emily tonight. I prayed she'd make it to morning." Her throat tightened. "But when I woke up, she was gone." She looked up then just once, and Kevin saw it, the grief she carried like breath. "I failed her." 3 words. That's all. But they landed harder than anything he'd heard in years. "And since that day," she whispered, "I told myself like if I ever held another child I wouldn't let go, not for anything, not even sleep." Silence filled the room again, except this time, it was sacred. Kevin glanced at the bassinet. Emily was still sleeping, and he realized something that pulled at a part of him he didn't know existed. This woman hadn't just saved his child. She was still trying to save her own. He didn't speak for a long time, not because he didn't have words, but because none of them felt worthy. Gloria sat still across the table, eyes lowered, hands folded, gloves still on. The same gloves she wore to scrub the marble floors, the same hands that had held his baby like something irreplaceable. Kevin stood quietly and walked to the edge of the room. He didn't know why. Maybe to breathe, maybe to hide the sting behind his eyes. He'd never asked about her life, never wondered where she went after hours, never noticed when she skipped breaks or stayed late. She was just there, like the furniture, like the silence. But that morning something shifted. He found himself watching her. Later that day, as the sun pushed through the kitchen windows, he passed by the nursery door and paused. Gloria was inside, holding Emily again. Not because she had to, she had already worked through the night, but because Emily reached for her. Her small hands gripped Gloria's collar like instinct, like trust. Gloria rocked gently in the chair by the window, humming low, brushing her fingers across the baby's cheek with the kind of care you can't fake, the kind that doesn't clock out. Kevin didn't go in. He just watched. He watched her fold baby clothes on the floor, one tiny sock at a time, watched her pick up dropped toys with a patience no one taught her, watched her rub circles on Emily's back until the child melted into her chest like she belonged there. That night he checked the time cards. Gloria hadn't taken a single day off in almost 7 months. No complaints, no requests. She just showed up, did her job, and somewhere in the cracks of routine, gave his daughter the one thing he hadn't: presence. He thought about the baby's first laugh. He hadn't been home. The first time she crawled. He'd seen it on a nanny cam. But Gloria, she was there. Always there. And for the first time in his life, Kevin Grant, who had built a life on strategy, data, and distance, felt completely, uncomfortably close. Not to failure, but to truth, because the woman he'd barely noticed had been holding his daughter's heart in her hands all along, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered how many more moments he had missed, because he hadn't known what love really looked like. The house was warmer now, not because of the heat, because Kevin had started noticing things. He walked slower through the halls, listened more during breakfast, found himself standing outside the nursery door more often than he used to. But while something in him was softening, Not everyone in the house saw it that way. They saw Gloria, and they whispered, "She's too close to the child." Crossing lines. "She's the maid, not the mother." The words floated through the kitchen, folded into side glances, and carried by voices that never said anything to her face. But Gloria heard them. She always heard them. She moved a little quieter after that. Took longer to knock before entering rooms. Avoided eye contact when she handed Emily over. One afternoon, Kevin's sister stopped by. She was holding a glass of wine, eyes sharp. "You trust her too much," she said casually, like it was an observation, not an accusation. "She sleeps in staff quarters. She works all hours. You're blurring lines, Kevin." He didn't respond right away because deep down, he knew it wasn't lines that were being blurred. It was something deeper than rules, something no policy could explain. That night, Gloria stayed later than usual. Emily had a fever, mild, but Gloria didn't leave her side. When the baby finally drifted off, Gloria slipped out of the room, quiet as ever. She walked down the hall, past the kitchen, and stopped, because there it was again, her name, spoken in a tone that wasn't kind. "She thinks she belongs here. She's trying to be something she's not." Gloria didn't cry. She didn't go back to her quarters. She went to the laundry room, sat on the wooden bench near the dryer, hands folded, heart heavy. The next morning, Kevin found a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long. Just a thank you, a goodbye, and a quiet promise that she didn't want to cause trouble. Her small suitcase was already packed by the door. She didn't want to be talked about, didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to stay where she wasn't wanted. But before she could reach the gate, Kevin was already waiting, Emily in his arms. No words at first, just the wind between them. Then, softly, "You don't leave the place you belong." He stepped closer, placing the baby gently back in Gloria's arms. "You're not just her nanny," his voice broke. "You're her heart." The house was asleep. For once there were no whispers, no questions, no lines being drawn in quiet corners. Gloria was still awake. She always was. She sat beside the crib, watching Emily breathe. One soft rise, one soft fall. The fever from the day before had passed, or so they thought. But then, a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, just silence. Too long, too still. Gloria leaned over the crib, her breaths short, labored, her tiny hands twitching beneath the blanket. Panic hit fast, but Gloria didn't scream. She lifted the baby gently into her arms and held her close. Kevin was already on his way. Something in him had pulled him from sleep. He turned the hallway corner just as Gloria opened the nursery door. He saw her face first, and then the baby. "Call a doctor," she said, voice shaking. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes the nursery was full. Machines, wires, cold voices, urgent orders. Kevin stood near the window, helpless. Money moved fast, but not fast enough. Nothing was working. The fever climbed. Emily's skin turned pale. Her breath slowed again. Kevin looked at the doctor, and in that brief second of eye contact, he saw fear, real fear. And then Gloria stepped forward. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She reached for Emily. At first the nurse protested, but Kevin nodded. Let her. Gloria sat in the rocking chair, the same one by the window where she always sang. She held the baby tight against her chest, like that first night on the bench. Her voice cracked as she began to hum. Not a lullaby from a children's book, but a hymn, old, southern, barely above a whisper. The same one she used to sing to Ava. Tears slid down her face onto Emily's tiny hands. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She rocked and sang and prayed without words. Kevin stood across the room, frozen. The machines kept beeping. But something changed. Emily's chest began to rise a little steadier. Her skin flushed with warmth again. Her tiny fingers gripped the edge of Gloria's blouse. The fever began to break. The doctor didn't speak. No one did. There was nothing to say. Because what had saved that child wasn't found in medicine or money. It was in the arms of a woman who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. The next evening, the dining room was full. Long table, crystal glasses, heavy silverware. Kevin rarely called family dinners, and never with the staff present. But tonight, everyone was there. His sister, his mother, his chief of staff, the housekeeper, the butler, and at the far end, Gloria, still in uniform, still unsure why she was seated among them. She sat with her hands in her lap, shoulders pulled in, as if she might vanish if no one looked directly at her. Kevin stood at the head of the table, silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, his voice cut through the air, low, steady. Last night, my daughter almost died. Fawkes froze, eyes turned. But she didn't, he continued, and not because of doctors, or machines, or anything I paid for. He looked at Gloria. She lived because someone loved her enough to hold her through it. The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else stared at their plate. Gloria didn't move. She held Emily, Kevin said. When I couldn't. He paused. I was busy. With business. With events. With everything I thought made me important. He looked around the table. But this woman, his voice cracked slightly, held the one thing that truly mattered, and she did it not because it was her job, but because she loved her. A gasp. Somewhere near the middle of the table. But Kevin kept going. She wrapped my child in her arms and risked her own health to keep her warm. She stayed awake for nights. She listened when she cried. She sang to her, prayed over her. And his eyes returned to Gloria. Then he did something none of them expected. He walked to her side and knelt, right there, beside the maid. The marble floor didn't matter. The room full of eyes didn't matter. He looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for saving my daughter. A pause. And for teaching me what it actually means to be a father. Gloria's lips parted, but no words came. Only tears. She shook her head, unsure what to do, how to respond. But Kevin wasn't waiting for approval. He turned back to the table. She's not just the help, he said firmly. She's family. The room sat still. No one objected. No one dared. Because in that moment, even the ones who used to whisper finally saw her. The mansion felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just warmer. The silence that once echoed off marble floors was slowly being replaced by humming in the kitchen, by soft baby laughter, by the quiet rhythm of love settling into a place it had never been allowed to live. Kevin started working from home more, not because he had less to do, but because he had something worth staying for. He watched the little moments now, the ones he used to walk past, like the way Emily giggled when Gloria kissed her nose, the way Gloria tucked her into naps with the kind of gentleness that couldn't be taught, the way Emily reached for her in the mornings before she reached for anyone else. One morning Kevin stepped into the nursery, holding something in his hand. Small, gold. Gloria was rocking Emily, whispering the tail end of a lullaby. She looked up as he entered. Not startled, just curious. He walked over and handed her the box. I don't want this to feel like a gift, he said softly, because it's not about thanks. Gloria looked down. Inside the box, a delicate gold necklace, a tiny heart hanging at the center. She blinked. I can't accept this, she said, her voice already trembling. You don't have to, he replied, but I hope you will. She held the chain in her palm, eyes fixed on the heart. For the woman, Kevin said, who kept mine beating. She tried to speak, but her voice caught somewhere between shock and tears. I don't need anything, she whispered. Kevin smiled gently. I know. That's why you deserve everything. He helped her clasp it around her neck. Nothing else was said. There didn't need to be. Later that afternoon, Emily took her first wobbly steps across the nursery rug. Gloria clapped quietly, kneeling to catch her. The toddler fell into her arms, laughing, "Mama G!" It was the first time she said it. Clear, unprompted, as if she'd always known the words. Gloria froze. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just held the child close and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, not like someone passing through, not like help, but like someone who belonged. And behind her, standing in the doorway. Kevin didn't say a word. He just smiled, because for the first time, his house felt like a home. Years passed, the seasons changed outside the gates, but inside the home, something sacred remained. Emily grew quickly, a little taller each spring, a little braver each fall. She scraped knees in the courtyard, painted handprints on hallway walls, learned to tie her shoes in the laundry room where Gloria used to hum lullabies. And Gloria, she stayed, through bedtime stories and school uniforms, through first words, first fevers, first questions about the world. She never asked for more. She just showed up, day after day. Heart open, arms
They called her
steady.
Mama
G without needing to explain why. Even the staff followed suit. And Kevin, he no longer walked through the halls with phone in hand. He knew now that the most important things couldn't be scheduled. They had to be witnessed. He sat in the garden more often now, beside the old stone bench, the one he once found too cold to notice. Now, it was sacred. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Emily, now 7, sat beside Gloria on that very bench. Her legs dangled. Her voice carried stories of school and friends and playground drama. Gloria smiled, her hands folded softly in her lap. The golden necklace still rested against her chest, worn now, but never removed. Kevin watched from the balcony, arms crossed gently, eyes a little misty. He knew this chapter of their lives was growing shorter. Gloria had started to slow down. She no longer cleaned, didn't have to. Her presence was no longer tied to duty. It was woven into the walls, into every photo, every corner, every memory that mattered. One morning, Emily was asked at school, "Who raised you?" She didn't hesitate. "My dad," she said, "and my Mama G." Simple, true, unshaken. That evening, Emily climbed into Gloria's lap with a book she could now read herself, but she still asked Gloria to turn the pages, because some things aren't about need. They're about love and staying close. Outside, the garden lights flickered on, and for a moment, the house, once echoing with emptiness, felt full of stories, of second chances, of hearts that never stopped holding on. Kevin stepped out onto the balcony, looking down at them, and in a voice low, meant for no one but memory, he whispered, "I used to think love was something you earned." He paused. "But the woman who had the least gave us the most." A breath. And we'll never forget that. "Jiggy!" Adrian Russell froze. At the sink, crying like something inside her had broken, was a woman he didn't recognize. Her back was trembling, her hands gripped the counter, and wrapped around her like he'd been born there was Joe, his son. Legs locked around her waist, arms around her neck. Adrian's voice caught in his throat. The teddy bear he'd brought from Manhattan slipped from his hand and hit the tile. 3 weeks away, and this is what he came home to. Not a daddy, not a hug, not even a glance. Just his boy, clinging to a stranger, crying like the world had ended. The woman turned slowly, tear-streaked face, eyes red and swollen. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "He won't let go." Joe's tiny voice broke through the silence. "Don't take her, Daddy. Please." Adrian's world shifted, right there, under kitchen lights and heartbreak. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea what to say. Adrian hadn't expected fanfare. He knew Joe might be shy after 3 weeks, knew he might need time to warm up, but he imagined something, a smile, a small run toward him, a giggle, not silence, not sobbing, and certainly not this woman. He tried to speak, tried to find his voice somewhere beneath the jet lag and the cold shock, but his mouth stayed dry. His eyes stayed on his son, whose small fingers were now twisted tightly into the folds of the woman's apron. The last time Adrian held him, it was in a glass hotel suite in San Francisco. Joe had waved goodbye on FaceTime, lips puckered to the screen. Now he wouldn't even look at him. "I'm Priscilla," the woman said softly, her arms gently supporting Joe's weight. "We spoke. The agency sent me." He searched his memory. There had been a voicemail. Something about a last-minute change. He hadn't followed up. Joe's shoulders shook. His breath came out in small, broken gasps against her neck. Priscilla didn't flinch. She didn't ask him to let go. She just held him, like she'd been doing it for a while. Adrian stepped forward, slowly. The teddy bear still lay on the floor behind him, forgotten. "I brought this for you," he said, voice unsure. Joe didn't respond. Priscilla swallowed hard. He has nightmares, almost every night." Her voice cracked, but she held it steady. "I stay with him until he can fall asleep again." Adrian felt the weight of those words land in his chest. Heavy, unforgiving. He remembered an email flagged as "not urgent." He never opened it. Joe pressed his face deeper into her shoulder, as if he could hide from the world and from his father. Adrian took another step, then stopped. He wasn't sure if he had the right to come any closer. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I hope this video makes you believe kindness comes from the heart. Adrian's jaw tightened. The silence between them felt louder than the sobs. He took a breath, steady, practiced. "Joe," he said again, softer this time. "It's me, buddy. Daddy's home." Joe flinched but didn't move. Adrian's eyes flicked to Priscilla. Her grip on the boy hadn't loosened. He didn't like the way that made him feel. "I'd like to speak to you," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Alone." Priscilla's spine straightened, but she didn't move either. "He doesn't want me to let go," she said quietly. "I tried." He cried harder. Adrian stared at her. Why was he crying in the first place? She hesitated, just for a second. Then her voice landed flat, without drama. "Because he told me he wished I was his mom." The words hung like smoke in the air. Adrian blinked. "What?" Priscilla's eyes glistened, but her face stayed calm. "He misses something. I just happened to be here when he needed someone." Joe let out a shaky breath. Priscilla's hand moved gently along his back, almost without thinking. It wasn't rehearsed. It was muscle memory. Adrian took a slow step forward. "I didn't know things had gotten this bad." "You weren't here to know," she said, almost apologetically. "Neither was I at first. I was supposed to just clean." She looked at him now. Really looked. No fear. Just honesty. "But then I heard him crying through the walls. First night. Then the next. And the next. Eventually," she glanced down at Joe. "I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening." Adrian's stomach churned. Guilt crept in, quiet and sharp. Joe finally lifted his head, just slightly. His cheeks were blotchy, his lashes wet. He looked at Adrian with the kind of fear only a child can carry. The kind that says, "You left me. Will you leave again?" Adrian stepped back. He couldn't answer that yet. Adrian leaned against the counter, one hand gripping the edge like it might anchor him. Priscilla's eyes followed his movement, not accusing, just waiting. "He has nightmares?" Adrian asked, quieter now. She nodded. "Almost every night. He wakes up calling for someone. Anyone." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "I tried to just leave the light on at first. I thought maybe he'd settle, but—" She looked down at the boy in her arms. "He didn't." Adrian's throat tightened. "He tells me stories," she went on. "Little pieces of you, your office, your plane, the teddy bear, how you said you'd be back soon." She let the silence breathe before finishing. "But then he asks why soon takes so long." Adrian swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the air had thickened. I didn't know the nanny quit, he murmured. You missed the agency's follow-up, she replied gently. They said you were too busy to speak. He didn't argue, couldn't. Priscilla adjusted Joe slightly, her hand never leaving his back. I didn't try to replace anyone, she said. I just stayed. When he cried, I stayed. Joe sniffled against her shoulder, still quiet, still watching his father from a safe distance. He asked if I could sing to him, said his old nanny used to before she left. So I did. Just a lullaby my grandmother sang to me when I was small. Her tone stayed simple. She wasn't defending herself, just laying truth bare. Adrian looked at his son, his boy, who once couldn't fall asleep without a bedtime call from him. Now he found peace in a stranger's voice. That stranger was no longer a stranger, not to Joe. Adrian opened his mouth but said nothing. What was there to say? Joe reached up, pulling Priscilla's arm tighter around his small frame. His eyes never left Adrian's, and in that long, aching gaze, Adrian saw it. The question behind the quiet, "Where were you when I needed you?" Adrian stepped out of the kitchen, not out of anger, not to avoid them. He just needed space to breathe. The hallway felt colder than he remembered, quiet, but not peaceful. It echoed now. He stopped beside the grand staircase, the one Joe used to race down in socks, laughing, calling for him. That laugh hadn't filled these walls in a while. Adrian leaned against the banister, loosening his tie like it might loosen the knot in his chest. 3 weeks, that's all it had been, but the gap between them felt like miles. He'd been in conference rooms, talking over lawyers and pitching CEOs on vision, in penthouses with skyline views, drinking to another closed deal. He told himself it was for Joe, that one day his son would understand. But Joe didn't want understanding. He wanted someone who showed up at bedtime, someone who noticed when the nightmares started, someone who stayed. Adrian rubbed a hand over his face. His skin felt unfamiliar, tight with regret. He thought money could buy him time, buy him grace, buy him out of mistakes. But Joe wasn't a client. He was an investment, a scared little boy who had cried loud enough for a stranger to hear him through the walls. And that stranger answered, not with permission, not with pay, just with presence. Adrian didn't know what hurt more, the fact that Joe found comfort in someone else, or the fact that Adrian had left him needing it. A faint sound from the kitchen pulled him back, a hiccup, a soft whisper. Joe's voice, still clinging. Adrian pushed off the banister. Whatever came next. He couldn't stand in the hallway anymore. Adrian stepped back into the kitchen. The room hadn't changed, but something in him had. Joe was still in Priscilla's arms, his face tucked tight against her collar. His fingers curled in the fabric like letting go would break something inside him. Adrian paused near the doorway, then slowly lowered himself, down to eye level. No suit, no title, no distance, just a father. Trying. He opened his arms. Not wide, not dramatic, just open. "Joe," he said gently. "Hey, buddy, I'm here now, if you want to come." Joe didn't move. His small body shifted slightly, eyes peeking out, red-rimmed, unsure. No leap, no smile, only silence. Then slowly he began to slide down from Priscilla's hold, one hand still gripping her apron, the other reaching forward like he was testing the air between them. His steps were small, careful, as if the floor might give way. When he reached Adrian, he didn't run, he leaned, pressed his body into his father's chest without a word. Adrian caught him, arms wrapping around him like something sacred. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Joe's hair. "I should have been here." Joe didn't speak, but he didn't let go either. His small arms tightened slightly. Then, barely audible, came the plea. "Don't make her leave." Adrian's throat tightened. He looked up at Priscilla, who stood frozen, hands twisting her apron, eyes wide with fear she couldn't hide. Adrian held his son close, then spoke, not just to her, but to the weight hanging in the room. "I don't want her to leave either." His voice shook. "I thought I hired a maid," he said, "but it looks like—" He found someone who showed up when I didn't. Priscilla didn't respond. Not yet. But the tears in her eyes said enough. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The house was still. Joe had fallen asleep curled on the couch, one small hand resting on the teddy bear Adrian almost forgot he brought. In the kitchen, the lights were lower now. Softer. Less interrogation, more confession. Priscilla stood at the stove, quietly wiping down the surface. Not rushing, not lingering, just moving. Adrian leaned against the doorway, watching her. His voice, when it came, was careful. You didn't have to stay all those nights. She kept wiping, eyes on her hands. I couldn't pretend he was fine, not when he wasn't. Adrian stepped in, not too close. I should have known. About the nightmares. About all of it. Priscilla turned slightly, her expression unreadable. I didn't expect to matter this much, she said, almost like she was admitting a mistake. I didn't come here to be anything more than what I was hired for. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. He paused, then added, but you were here when it counted, and that means more than I can say. Her eyes flicked to his, just once, then back to the cloth in her hand. He took a breath. If you ever want more, childcare courses, school, anything, just say the word, I'll support it. She froze, the cloth stilled between her fingers. Why? She asked softly. Because you helped my son breathe again, he said, and I didn't even notice he was suffocating. She blinked, swallowed. I wasn't trying to take anyone's place. I know, he said, but you showed up like someone who could have. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint rhythm of Joe's breathing in the next room, steady now, like it hadn't been in weeks. Priscilla nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Adrian nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. The next morning came slow. Grey light filtered through linen curtains. Rain tapped softly on the windows. Priscilla stood near the dining table, folding laundry with practiced calm. The kind of movement that asked for no attention but deserved it. Adrian poured coffee across the room, watching her. Can I ask you something? He said. She paused but didn't turn. Of course. When did it stop feeling like just a job? The question landed quietly. She folded a small t-shirt, smoothing the fabric with her palm. Probably the second night, she said. He called out for someone. No name. Just a cry. She looked up. I didn't plan to go in. I sat outside his door for almost an hour, thinking I should wait, that someone else would come. Adrian's stomach tightened. No one did, she added. So I did. He nodded slowly, walked over, leaned against the edge of the table. This house doesn't make it easy to feel like you belong, he admitted. She gave a faint smile. It wasn't built for warmth. He studied her. I want to be clear about something, he said. You don't work for me anymore. You work with me, with us. Priscilla looked at him then, really looked. A mix of relief and doubt flickered in her eyes. I don't want to overstep, she said. I don't want him to get attached and then... She trailed off. The and then didn't need finishing. Adrian understood. You didn't force that bond, he said. You earned it, and I won't take it away from him. Priscilla folded the last shirt and set it down. She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. Neither of them said it out loud, but something had shifted. The title had changed. The line had blurred. And in that blur, something unexpected was starting to take root. The smell of burnt toast drifted through the hallway before the sound of the smoke alarm ever did. Adrian fumbled with the toaster, waving away the thin trail of smoke like it might erase the evidence. Joe sat at the counter, legs swinging, chin resting on one hand, watching. Amused. Priscilla walked in, towel in hand, eyes already knowing. I was trying, Adrian said, half defensive, half defeated. She took the bread from his hand, gently opened the trash can, and dropped it in without a word. Try the stove next time, she said softly. It listens better. Joe giggled. Adrian turned to him. Traitor. The boy grinned, mouth full of cereal. It was the first real smile Adrian had seen in weeks. No hesitation, no hiding. He didn't say anything, just watched his son chew, the bowl between small hands, the teddy bear seated beside him like an honored guest. Priscilla cracked 2 eggs into a pan, her movements easy now, familiar. Adrian stepped aside, gave her space. He didn't know what this morning was exactly, but it felt right, or at least like a start. Joe reached for Adrian's hand with one of his own, and Priscilla's with the other. No words, just connection. They stood like that for a moment, silent, 3 hands tangled across a breakfast counter that had never felt this full. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, something else had begun. Adrian looked at his son, then at the woman he almost overlooked. I almost missed this, he whispered. Priscilla didn't answer. She just placed the eggs on a plate, slid them toward him and said, "Don't burn these." A week had passed. No more midnight cries, no more calls through the walls, just the soft hum of a house learning how to breathe again. Adrian sat on the living room floor, legs crossed, Joe asleep against his chest, one hand on the boy's back, rising and falling with every steady breath. The TV played low in the background, some old cartoon neither of them had really been watching. They hadn't needed it. Across the room, Priscilla sat on the rug, flipping through a picture book. She wasn't reading out loud, just turning pages, quietly, like she didn't want to wake anyone, or maybe like she didn't want the moment to end. Adrian looked at her. She met his gaze. No tension, no fear, only a calm understanding that hadn't been there before. He gently adjusted Joe, cradling the boy closer. "He sleeps better now," he said. Priscilla nodded. "He trusts the quiet again." Adrian rested his chin on his son's head. "I took time off," he said, cleared the calendar. Her eyes widened slightly. "For how long?" "I don't know yet," he answered, "but long enough to matter." Silence settled. Not heavy, just full. Adrian looked around, at the couch still dented from a day of cartoons, the blanket Joe refused to let go of, the plate of half-eaten grapes Priscilla had cut up hours ago. This wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but for the first time, it felt like home. He reached out, slid the picture book closer to him. Joe stirred but didn't wake. "You still want to take those classes?" he asked. Priscilla hesitated. "I might." "You'll have whatever you need," he said, and not just because of Joe, but because people who show up should be seen. She blinked. Once. Then gave the smallest smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Adrian nodded. Neither was he. Sometimes love doesn't arrive dressed the way you expect. Sometimes it shows up in an apron, in lullabies sung through cracked doors, in the hands that never pulled away. And if you're lucky, you learn to stay. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, or even just a moment of stillness, don't leave quietly. At Elevated Heart Stories, we share real moments that move hearts and open eyes. So take a second to subscribe, like this video, and let us know where in the world you're watching from, because your voice might be the light someone else is waiting for. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and keep your heart elevated. Your